Hello, viewer. This is Finn here. This is my review of Scarlet Salvation. This is going to be my sort of first video review take on a video game that I tried. This video is in part response to a user who had been on the Steam forums who had posted a thread titled, "Please form your own judgment." Well, I did just that, with 2 hours of playtime playing the PlayStation 4 version via backwards compatibility on PlayStation 5. So, what is this game about? What is its setting? Well, we take the perspective, and our protagonist is an amnesiac female soldier, is what it looks like initially. And she is accompanied by a military artificial intelligence, or large language model sort of pseudo thing. The object of the game is to figure out not just how she got there, but also to figure out enough about how she got there in the first place to be able to call help because, well, this was a military facility that she had found herself in and where the AI had found her. You then go through a series of rooms and tunnels within said military facility to try and piece together how to get out of there or how to call for help. Because the basic plot of the game, and this was addressed just about right away, the military knows that you are there, but they don't do anything because you are not a high enough priority because they have no idea who you are, which to me makes not a lot of sense because what is a random ass civilian doing here? But whatever, let's just let that suspense of disbelief carry on. The game has you go from room to room in a sort of roguelite sort of shtick, kind of like Binding of Isaac in a way, where you go from room to room, collect items, get upgrades, what have you, in a typical roguelite type setting. You die, you lose certain items, and then you start from the beginning, sort of. But just like in Binding of Isaac, not each playthrough is exactly the same. Enemy placements are somewhat different. The tunnels can sort of zigzag, kind of, or be straight. The room sizes vary each run. However, it's still important to note that it is a very repetitive game. You're just going through from, again, room to room, shooting down robots that see you as the enemy and try to shoot you down with projectiles. Now, speaking of shooting, let us get into the combat of the game. So the game presents you with a couple of options when you are in combat. You are presented with the typical hit-scan weapon, but you are also given the option to melee certain robots when you are within range of them. And in this game, melee is also tied to parrying, but not quite how you'd think. Parrying in the game is more like deleting projectiles that are coming your way within a certain range. All you have to do is press the melee button when they're close enough to you, and then boom, they just get deleted. You can also dash to be able to avoid those projectiles and avoid certain lasers. As for the control of our Missy protagonist herself, she controls fine. Doesn't feel too slow, doesn't feel too fast, just feels kind of right to play as our female protagonist in the game, who I don't know the name of. At least I had not gotten that far in the game to be able to find out her name. However, even though she controls fine moving around, the same cannot be said for the default settings for the aim. The default settings for the aim are set to 50%, which I found to be just slightly too fast, and I found myself missing quite a bit, especially if you don't use the focus down the sightline feature while in third person. Yes, this is a third-person shooter. How the shooting sort of works in the game is that there's a little bubble on screen for where there's auto assist for when you aim down your sight. And there's this little marker that's in the middle of it that shifts around onto the closest enemy within said circle that highlights when you are close enough to said enemy or not. However, it is important to note that with the parry system, the only way to quote-unquote delete the projectiles is through the melee combat. If you try shooting down the projectiles with your hit-scan weapon, none of them do anything. You're given a shotgun, a pistol, a rifle, etc. so forth within the game that you can use to shoot down the robots with. In addition to that, there's a quirk sort of system where you can upgrade your health, upgrade your defense, upgrade the amount of energy that you use, etc. And by recollecting the same item, you're able to upgrade said quirk. So, for example, at least during my playthrough, I went for a more defensive run where I leveled up the defense from level 1 to level 5. But what's defense without damage? Unfortunately, through my playtime of roughly 2 hours again, I was not able to find how to heal in the game. And I really hope it's not what I think it is, where you only heal upon death. I really hope that's not the case. And speaking of the weapons you collect, which is drag and drop, if you played Left 4 Dead 2, it's similar to where you can drop a weapon and get a new one that's more shiny or that might better fit your playstyle. But at the end of a floor, you're given this box looking sort of thing that allows you to upgrade your weapons using the in-game currency. You can sort of trade that in to upgrade it. And that can upgrade the damage, it can upgrade the rate of fire, at least from what I saw, but it doesn't seem to affect the reload time. Or at least if it does, it's very minimal that it doesn't matter. And you only really start seeing improvements after you've put in a lot of that currency into your upgrades. Now, my biggest criticism with Scarlet's Salvation is that lack of variety, that repetitiveness in the game. Not only is it the samey looking rooms, room to room, but there is very little enemy variety. Now, I should note that I probably have not encountered every enemy in the game, but so far it's all been the same, pretty much. Ones that shoot out in a circle, ones that spam out a bunch of like projectiles, ones that rapid fire, ones that lock onto you and shoot. Like, there is variety in that fact, but it's all still projectiles, nothing melee. Oh, but lest I forget, there is an enemy that does fire out lasers, but it does some sort of spin motion, and during my playtime when I had played it, even when I was directly in front of the enemy, it would often miss my hitbox somehow. Now, that pretty much covers the game itself. With that stated, let us get into the more technical problems that I had with the game. I sort of hinted on this with the aim before, with how it felt just a little too fast, but let's get into some more technical details. Firstly, the menus. The menus are kind of confusing. You would think when you would press the backstage button, I don't remember what they called it in-game, but when you press the backstage button, it shows like your character, what you have equipped and whatnot, but it doesn't show you the options. To be able to see the options, or even to suspend your game, which saves your current game so that you can come back later, just like in a roguelite, only then are you presented with options to be able to readjust your aim, your brightness, and rebind your controls. Yes, you are not able to rebind your controls when you first start the game. You're just thrown in, and then it's not explained how you rebind or change your settings. So maybe you think, okay, maybe I just have to press the backstage button, the big button in the middle of the PlayStation controller, because again, I played this on PlayStation 5. But no, keep in mind, you got to keep in mind that you got to press the options button on your controller to be able to open the pause menu, and only then are you able to configure your settings. I mean, it sort of makes sense, but I kind of wish it was all in one place rather than in two different menus. It's kind of weird. A minor nitpick that I have with the game has to do with the minimap. Now, the minimap, it functions, it works, it gets the job done, but I kind of wish it had that little bit of quality of life where it sort of showed you the direction of where your camera was facing, so that you didn't have to move your character to be able to know what direction you are in. I just wish that that was left to the camera instead. Another small nitpick I had with the game is the fact that you have to hold down the X button to be able to close the notifications that pop up on your screen. I wish that rather than holding down a button, you just press the options button and it sort of moved on from there. Because as it is right now in the game, it just feels like it wastes your time a little bit. It sort of puts a pause to the action whenever the notification pops up, and then you have to keep pressing X, 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 X until you've seen all the slides, and then you got to hold the X button for one final time to be able to progress and keep playing the video game. Something else that was not clearly explained, or at least that I did not see explained, was the fact that you can also dash through lasers. Another thing to keep in mind during gunplay is that when you choose to reload, it takes you out of the focused auto assist aim system. And then after you are finished reloading, it does take you back into it. Something else that I had noticed during gameplay that wasn't clearly explained, this is going to be a bit of a running thing as I proceed, but what was also not explained is that you can stun the robots after an X amount of shots fired onto them. And unfortunately, based off my playtime, I did not see whether different weapons caused varying levels of stun or not, based off how many shots that you pumped into said robots. The character banter is fine. It humanizes both, and it works. It's okay. I don't mind it too much. I kind of like it, in a way. Now, this has to be one of my biggest problems with Scarlet Salvation, and it is the fact that I was not able to find a healing source within my 2 hours of playtime. I thought, alright, maybe when I go to the upgrade station for my weapons, that just refreshed my health. No, it does not. I also figured, alright, maybe if I moved floors, like move on to the next floor, it would refresh my health then. No, it does not. And I checked numerous of those quirks throughout the game to see if there were any regenerative, but no, there aren't any that regenerate your health. Rather, what they do is they give you quirks that are able to increase your maximum HP. However, they do not refresh your health points. You're still stuck at the current health points that you were at prior. Another big issue that I had with Scarlet Salvation is just the challenge. The challenge comes from just the enemies and a whole bunch of them just vomiting out a bunch of projectiles at you at once. There's no real thought or challenge to the combat. It's just a bunch of dodging and then deleting projectiles with the melee to be able to progress. And in fact, you can just skip entire fights and go to the next room. There's nothing stopping you. You can just waltz into the middle of a battle, skip all the robots, and just proceed into the next room. However, if you want to upgrade your weapons, you do not want to skip those fights, and you will want to upgrade those weapons. Some players said on Steam via reviews that you don't need to upgrade your weapons, but I do think it is a necessity. Perhaps you don't need to max out their level, but you do need to upgrade them to some extent. Another sort of little nitpick that I had with Scarlet Salvation is the enemy spawning. Now, when you enter a room, there are enemies that spawn upon you while entering said room. However, rather than have them spawn in a sort of believable way in the world that they are in, they sort of just do the typical compile hard idea factory thing and just phase in through some magic fantasy type thing, which does break the immersion of the first-person military shooter thing a bit, in my opinion. Another nitpick that I have with enemy spawns, and I think this one's a bit more critical when it comes to the gameplay, is the fact that there seems to be some sort of background timer for when enemies spawn. Sure, there are the ones that spawn initially, but sometimes I just sort of sat there for a little bit, not doing anything, just observing, trying to formulate a plan how to encounter these upcoming enemies, because you need to defeat enemies to be able to collect the aforementioned currency. However, I noticed that sometimes enemies would randomly spawn in after a certain amount of time, and I would either get ambushed from behind or from the sides that I didn't notice prior. Yes, there is a visual cue for when they spawn, but that sort of ambush thing is just weird. I wish they would have scripted that better. Now, with all that stated, what are my final thoughts, my sort of closure thoughts on Scarlet Salvation? It's a fine third-person shooter. It's not the best I've played. It's not the worst either. The roguelite elements are fine. They're not my cup of tea. Personally, I'm not a super huge fan of roguelites. The only one that I really like is Binding of Isaac, personally. But otherwise, the game is fine. It's fun, albeit repetitive to play. It's pretty samey. It does give you some sensory deprivation because of how samey the rooms look and the robots and whatnot that you fight and go through and counter, whatever. But now, the biggest point of contention with the game, at least at its launch, was this a $60 game, a AAA priced game? within the short amount of time that I had played, 2 hours is enough time to form an opinion on a game, in my opinion. And in my opinion, Scarlet Salvation is not a $60 game. It is not worth that AAA price point that it initially launched with. I don't even think it's a $30 game, half of that price. Based off what I had played, I wouldn't lowball it by saying it's a $15 or $20 game. I think a more fair price for it would have been around 25 or 24, somewhere around that price range. I think that would have been a lot more fair price for it. I think that would have been a lot more fair and reasonable price point to access the game. Now, Idea Factory did bend the knee on that $60 price point. When you go onto Steam or you go onto PlayStation, I don't know if it's on Xbox, I hadn't checked, but on those two platforms that I know of, they did lower the price from that initial $60 down to $30. However, that is not taking into account the deluxe edition, quote unquote, which just includes a digital art book and the game soundtrack. That tacks on an additional $20 on the aforementioned platforms that I had just brought up, making it a $50 experience if you want to get the soundtrack and the digital art book for the game, which is something to keep in mind if you do want more content for this game outside of just playing it. As per the soundtrack itself, it's fine, it fits. It's not memorable. I can't name any single tune out of the game, but if you enjoyed any of the songs, that's more power to you. Personally, they're just not super memorable, in my opinion. Now, if I had to give this game a rating, I'd have to give it a 6 out of 10. It's not a bad game, but it's also not a masterpiece. It has its issues, there's no denying that, and they could have definitely worked out some of those kinks. But as it is now in its current state and build, it is a serviceable game if you're just looking to sit down and have some semi-mindless fun, a little bit of strategy. It's a fine game to play. It's just not the best that you'd ever play. Now, I hope with this video, it's sort of helped to give you a sort of little gateway into what this game is and whether it'd be worth picking it up yourself. Personally, I wouldn't pick up the game for more than $25. If you can get it at $25 or lower, then it's perfectly fine. But at $30 or even heck, it's $60 price point. Nah. That's too much. That's too much. It doesn't offer you a AAA experience. It doesn't offer up enough content for that sort of asking price. And viewer, that was my final thoughts on Scarlet Salvation. I don't think I'll be doing any more video review type videos like this again. I shouldn't say that I will never do this again, but it's very, very unlikely. I don't do reviews on my channel on the regular. This was just sort of a one-off thing in response to a forum thread that was posted on the Scarlet Salvation, Steam forums. Anywho, I'll stop rambling and wasting your guys' time. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.